Уважаемые гости, пожалуйста, занимайте места в зале. Через минуту мы начнем.
Dear guests, please take your seats in the audience. We are starting within a minute.
Will not come. No. Later. So, Miss Papazza will it's her speech, and after that you can invite. Would be great. Yes. I will. You need?
Yeah, just when I talk.
On. Off. Perfect. Да, табличка. Их не пять. Их 5 человек, так что один стул можете убрать. Добрый день.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Welcome to the Free Market Roadshow in Kiev. My name is Anton Yashchenko. I'm the director of Bendukidze Free Market Center, the co-organizer of this event in Ukraine. Let me tell you a few words about the road show that we're going to host today. And this is the joint project of the Austrian Economic Center and many other NGOs and task forces and think tanks from Europe. It's the 9th year that we are holding it, and it started from scratch, practically for cities in the EU. And this year, these are 45 cities. This is a 3-month tour that we are going to hold. This is the 43rd roadshow. After that, the colleagues shall go to Tbilisi and Chisinau, and then the tour for 2016 will be over. I also want to say that the partners for this event are Friedrich Naumann Fund, and we are really thankful to them for the organization of the event. And I would like to briefly outline the agenda for today. We shall start from the introduction of Her Excellency Mrs. Germine Poppeler, the Ambassador Plenipotentiary of Austria to Ukraine, and then we will go over to panel 1, where our foreign guests will dwell on harmonization of tax system in the EU to the EU standards, and offshore questions are also very high on the agenda in the EU. And after that, we shall have a brief coffee break. And we're also expecting the Minister of Finance, Alexander Daniluk, to join us. He is now at the meeting with the Prime Minister, but he promised to peep in after that. And he will have a keynote speech on the priorities of the Ministry of Finance reform, and not just that. And the event will be crowned by the panel agenda for Ukraine, and we're going to talk about the breakthrough innovational reform concepts that will allow us to achieve significant economic growth in the short-term perspective, not a 1% growth like the Ministry of Economy and the IMF. So I'm honored to invite the Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary, Mrs. Hermine Poppeler.
I think it's okay here. So, it's fine. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear honorable guests. It's a pleasure for me as Austrian ambassador to speak to you here. Just a few words. It was a pleasure for me to see all the Austrian books out there in the hall. There is the Austrian School of Economics. We have quite a number of famous Austrian economists like Hayek, like Van Mises, like Schumpeter, and a few of them are translated also in Ukrainian. And I asked my driver to go back to the embassy and bring translated in Ukrainian books from Mises and Schumpeter, so you see that they are known also here in your country. It's a pleasure to speak here to people who are really very much interested in the economic development of your country. And I, as an Austrian ambassador here in your country, have of course also to look what is going on, not only in politics, but also in the field of economy in your country. So concerning the economic development, I hope that Ukraine has passed the bottom and developments are going in the right direction. The forecasts for this year with slight growth from 1% to 2%, depending on who is forecasting it, is a good trend. It's definitely a good trend, but it should be more. And in terms of reaching a better growth, I think it's necessary to do reforms and do reforms quickly. As an Austrian ambassador here in this country, I deal also with a lot of Austrian companies who are investors in your country. So I would like to raise a few points which, from the point of an Austrian investor, could be interesting and could be important for your country and also for what you are going to do, reforms. Investors need to have a country with a rule of law. They need to know the rules of the country, the laws of the country, the regulations in certain countries. And they need to know that they can defend their position in any court in the country according to the laws of the country. They need to know that the same rules apply to everybody. Investors need also to have economic freedom. That means they should be able to do with their earnings whatever they want to do. And I would like to raise here a point which is of big concern to foreign investors. They cannot export their dividends. So if investors are coming to Ukraine, they are earning money here and they are not able to export the dividends and maybe do investments in other countries. I think this is not a positive sign. This is not an encouraging sign for investors in general. So I do understand that of course, it was necessary to stabilize the currency situation here. But this now has happened. And I think it would be about time to think about lifting these restrictions of the export of dividends. I personally know a few Austrian companies. They are middle-sized companies. And they have to fight with this problem. And they say, oh, well, we would like to be in this country, to stay in this country, and to encourage other Austrian companies to come here. But if we have to tell them money stays here and cannot be brought out of the country again, then it's very, very difficult. Another point is the deregulation. There is still a lot of red tape here. And I think all of you know what I mean. There are a lot of regulations which are not necessary. They make it only complicated and they open up a door for bribing and corruption. Let's put it very bluntly in that way. An economy needs to have regulations, but if it is over-regulated administratively, then it's not good. But I know also that there are a lot of people here, young people, in this group of easy business in Ukraine who are making very good suggestions to the government to minimize this red tape. So there is a lot of good work done already in this field. And of course, one point which is necessary to mention is fighting corruption. Corruption is not a friend of free economy and not a friend of economic development. So the faster this process goes to cut down on corruption, the better it is. And there had been already very good signs. Institutions had been established, NABU, and also the Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office had been established. So let's hope that they can do the work and they can contribute to create a better business climate. I would like to mention one more point, which is the DCFTA, the Deep and Comprehensive Free Trade Agreement, where Ukraine is part now since 1st of January this year. This opens up a lot of opportunities for businesses here in Ukraine. Of course, it costs a lot. It costs people who have ideas, and it costs also money because you have to adapt to standards. But I think this opening up to European standards and applying European standards opens the market for the whole world. So it is money well spent, which is invested in adapting to European harmonization, legislation and standards. So I would like to wish you very fruitful discussion today. I think there will be some very interesting ideas from Dr. Barbara Kolben from Austria, who is the head of the Austrian Economics Institute and the Hayek Institute. So she is not the first time here in Ukraine, and I am quite sure that you will have a very lively discussion with her and with all the other participants. I wish you all the best for this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please, dear participants of the first panel, take your seats. I will move here.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to moderate this first panel. My name is Barbara Kolm, and I direct the Austrian Economic Center at the Hayek Institute. Your Excellency, thank you very much for your kind introduction. Anton and the entire team, not only of the Bedo-Kieze Center, but also of the Friedrich Naumann Stiftung für Freiheit, thank you very much for hosting us here, for partnering with us. As was already mentioned, we are partnering not only around Europe, but we go as far as Israel, Georgia, with 127 think tanks, university groups, and freedom fighters, as you want to say, those people who believe in reason, in competition, in self-advancement and self-responsibility, and who want to have their countries ranked as #1 in indices, not only of economic freedom, but also of being a good place to live and a good place to invest and a good place to run businesses. So this is what the roadshow is about. It started out with the philosophy of Austrian economics back then, and Mises was born in Lemberg, as we say in German, and is a son of your country. And so this tradition obviously is deeply rooted in your hearts and souls. And I think it's time that we bring it back to reality. And my panel here, our distinguished speakers from around the world, will debate with you furiously until also your Federal Minister of Finance will join us and look for alternatives and opportunities. Because after all, politics is the art of being brave and of thinking ahead and of doing things, getting them done, and of believing in opportunity and creating the right framework for those people, namely the entrepreneurs who take risks and those people who partner with the entrepreneurs, namely their employees, to go ahead. And this is what the roadshow is about, to discuss the various options that we face and also the challenges. And I mean, the European Union has done many things in the past, and it has failed with many things in the past. And the three biggest challenges, and I have stated this last year as well and the year before, one is the financial crisis, where we have not fulfilled our tasks. The second is the security issue, where we definitely let you down as a European Union, and we have failed, and we hope that this will be, well, made up again. And the third, and this is now the migration crisis, where it took way too long to come up with solutions. But now, on this first panel, we will also discuss BEPS and FATCA, the tax issues that each and everybody will face in the future. We will discuss tax harmonization and why tax harmonization is a big issue, and why we rather go for tax competition to make places like Ukraine more competitive and more attractive, and why, as Her Excellency has pointed out already, foreign direct investment should be coming into your country. But without further ado, I would like to briefly introduce our panel. Yaron Brook, who will have the first intervention, and who will be kind of the keynote and, you know, provoking us deeply. Yaron is the president of the Ayn Rand Institute, which, by the way, publishes wonderful books that were unfortunately sitting in customs this time.
11 days.
For 11 days. So this is something where we need to work on, definitely. But next year we will make sure that those books are here in time. Otherwise, please Google Ayn Rand Institute and also have a look at Yaron's other many speeches and, of course, the publications that he himself does. The next speaker is Ron Manners from Australia, a successful business gentleman as well. Then we have our friend from Argentina, Federico Fernandez, who will bring in the Argentinian perspective and tell you what happens if taxes are skyrocketing and if the federal ministers of finance don't take any responsibility. And then, of course, we will see the Ukrainian perspective by our friend and partner from Ernst & Young here. Thank you for being with us. But without further ado, Yaron, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. And you want us sitting or standing or?
We believe in spontaneous order.
Spontaneous orders.
Up
It's
to you.
easier to talk when you stand. Okay. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you, Barbara, for inviting me. Thank you all for being here. I would remind everybody, since you were talking about books, that Atlas Shrugged is now available in Ukrainian, I think in 3 volumes. It's a bestseller here, so if you haven't read Atlas Shrugged, what's the matter with you? Go buy it and read it. So there are real opportunities here. There's a real, in some sense, a virgin environment in which new ideas can really, grow and become popular. And I'm hoping that this is the basis for such a, revolution in Ukraine as we move into the future, a positive revolution. Taxes. They've got me talking about taxes. I have no idea because I'm no tax expert. And I'm actually, I'll shock Barbara, I'm kind of for tax harmonization. If we're willing to harmonize very, very close to zero, I'm all for everybody having, a flat 5% tax. I think we could all agree on that. But the fact is, that is not the goal of tax harmonization. The goal of tax harmonization is to force low tax regimes, low tax countries up, to force them to participate in high tax regimes so that money doesn't flow into the lower tax places, right? So they want to force Western European high taxes on countries that have low taxes like Ireland, which would devastate Ireland and do nothing to help Western Europe. So we could get into a lot of discussion on the technicalities of taxes. Generally, clearly it is better if we have some competition, particularly if that competition drives tax rates down in as many places as possible. But I want to talk about something a little bit more fundamental. These technical issues, I don't think are the fundamental issue that drives issues of taxation, that drives taxes higher. I want to talk about our whole conception of taxes. Because implicit in most discussions of taxes, is the idea that society, Ukrainian society, German society, Austrian society, somebody, has this pool of money. We have this big pie that has been created of wealth. And the decision we have to make is how much we're going to distribute to different people within our society. That wealth is a common phenomena. It's a good that is shared by all of us. And now, we get to decide, do we give you 50% of what you've earned, or do we take a small amount? But it's we. It's this big pie, and we're divvying it up. We're dividing it up. You see this in the tax debate. You see this in the inequality debate, which is a dominant debate out there in the culture. There's a common pie. Wealth is common, wealth is shared, and we get to divvy it up, and we get to decide how much you get to keep. But that's upside down. That makes no sense. Wealth is something that is produced by individuals. Wealth is something that you own. Taxes are the state coming in with a gun and taking some of what you own away from you. The perspective on taxes should not be a collectivistic perspective. That is the perspective of this big social pie, that earning and wealth and products are social. There is no such thing, really, as, I'm going to fall. There is no such thing, really, as a country's wealth. Ukraine doesn't have wealth. America doesn't have wealth. Who has wealth? Individuals have wealth. Individuals who create that wealth. I have wealth, you have wealth, you have wealth. And yes, economists can come together and they can aggregate that wealth. And they can aggregate your income and say there's national income and there's national wealth. But that's just an aggregation of what you create and you create and you create and you create. There is no pie. There's your pie, and your pie, and your pie. And some of your pies might be big because you worked hard, or you had a great idea, and you innovated, and you created something exciting that's worth a lot, and therefore your pie is big. And somebody else's pie might be small because they're a student and just starting out. But we each have our individual pie. And the government comes and takes a piece of that pie. But the perspective needs to be from the individual, not from the group. And that is true also for the whole inequality story. The gap between the rich, the wealthy, and the poor is irrelevant to anything. If you make a little pie, you have a little pie. If somebody makes a big pie, they make a lot of money because they invent, I don't know, an iPhone or Uber or Google or something, and they become fabulously wealthy. They have a big pie. It's nobody's business to take from some and give to others, to redistribute pies. What you create should be yours. What you create should be yours. So our whole perspective, I think, on economics needs to be brought down to the level of the individual rather than the level of the collective, of the group, of the economy. Now, when it comes to tax rates, when it comes to taxes, what is the optimal level of the amount the government should take from my pie? Or your pie, right? Somebody said 0. Yeah, 0 would be ideal, but he's saying no.
You need protection.
Yes, I need protection. How much does protection cost? 10%. Maybe 10%. Maybe 10%, right? Probably less. Right? Probably less. But 10%, okay, let's agree. Taxes should be easy. 10% flat for everybody. No deductions, no exclusions, no favors, no goodies, nothing to buy politicians with, because politicians can't give you anything, because it's just flat and simple. You know where corruption comes in? where it's 10% for everybody except you, because you, I don't know, you're a favored industry, and you because I just like you, and you because you're family. That's where corruption comes in, right? That's where these guys over here are saying, wait a minute, these guys are getting loopholes. I'll give you a few bucks. Give us a loophole too. But if you make it absolute, you make it flat, simple, everybody understands it, and no, capital N, capital O, no exclusions, no deductions, no special favors. Everybody pays the same. You get rid of corruption, and you institute a far more rational economic system because the government is not dominating. What are tax rates today in Ukraine? If you aggregate all the taxes, there are different rates for different people, right? And there's complexity. And even if you have a rate, you don't actually pay that rate because and this is the same in America, same in Europe. We have all these exclusions and deductions. And who does that benefit? Who do all these exclusions and deductions ultimately benefit? Those who seek power. Because they get to decide who gets the benefit. And you know, they never say it's about power. Who do they say it's about? The common good. It's about the public interest. We need to give this industry favors because it's good for the public. And who is the public? Who knows who the public is, except for the person in power who can channel the public and knows what's good for them, right? And that's how they get power. They get power by defining what's in the public interest, what's in the common good, and dictating to you. Again, let's get rid of public interest. Let's get rid of the common good and ask a much simpler question. What's good for you? What's good for you? What's good for you? And when you put it in individual terms, it becomes quite clear. What's good for each one of us is to be free, is to be left alone to pursue our own values, our own happiness, protected by a government, but that's it. We need government to protect us from coercion, from crooks, from thieves, from fraudsters, from foreign invaders, from terrorists. But other than that, we should be free as individuals to pursue our own values, to make our own choices, to live our own lives in the way that we see fit. No central planner knows what's inside my head or inside your heart or what your values are, or what your choices would be. But if we leave people free, beautiful things happen. Things that you couldn't imagine happen. Things that nobody will predict, nobody could forecast happen. So, just like with taxes, we need to think about the impact on the individual, which immediately makes us think, the smaller the better, because I think about my paycheck, which I pay over 60% taxes. I can pay, you know, personally, I pay close to 60% because I live in California. 60%, which means that 60% of my time, 60% of my effort, 60% of my life is spent working for other people. Not that I've chosen to work for them. You can choose to work for other people, but forced on me to work for other people. But if we start thinking about the individual, what kind of tax rate do I want to pay? The smallest possible where my security is still maintained. The smallest possible where I'm still protected from crooks, fraudsters, thieves, terrorists. That's it. And that's true of each one of you. So when we look at the political world out there, I think what we need to resurrect, and I'm not going to go on too long, Barbara, we need to resurrect this very fundamental idea that I think made the United States and made Western Europe as prosperous, as successful as they are today. And that is the idea of individualism. The idea that the individual is an end in itself, that the role of government is not to be served by people, but to serve the individual, to protect him, and to leave him alone. The ideas that shaped, that have made possible the wealth creation in the West, in Western Europe, in the United States, or ideas that originated in the 18th century in the Scottish and French Enlightenment. They are the ideas of reason and individualism. Only individuals reason, only individuals exist. And if we focus on what's good for the individual, if we focus on what's right for the individual, if we focus on leaving the individual free to pursue their own life, their own rational values, their own happiness, then we will create a society that is prosperous, successful, and wealthy. And I wish that on Ukraine as I do on every country in the world. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Yaron. I would continue with Ron Manners from Australia, giving his perspective. And yes, 7 minutes because the minister is coming in.
Thank you, Barbara. I promised to have a 1 hour speech, but I promised Barbara that I'll cut it down to 7 minutes. But the long version will be up on our mancal.org website for all to enjoy. Now, this is my second trip to Ukraine, and the first was 2 years ago, and I must say it's got a much more peaceful feel about it this time. So, and you've made some starts on your reforms, that's fantastic. In Australia, we've made some starts on our reforms, but we're very slow. Now, Australia's claim to fame is not just that we came second to Ukraine in the Eurovision contest. There's more to it than that. Australia really had a small but significant part to play in introducing flat rate taxation to firstly Estonia, which then flooded to other European countries. We've never been able to simplify our tax system. It's so complex that I don't know a single Australian that can tell me how much tax they pay. The challenge is to reform a system, and it's a tough challenge. And I think back at a quotation that Ronald Reagan gave many years ago, and I'll just borrow this, it goes back. There have been revolutions before and since ours, but those revolutions simply exchanged one set of rulers for another. Ours must be a revolution that changes the very concept of government. That rings true for Ukraine, and it rings true for Australia. The taxation, the title of the session is Tax and Death and Taxes. I think there's an obvious reason why it's chosen, that title is chosen, because I'm cynical of governments, and governments excel. Governments are extremely good at only two things. One is stealing money from their own people, which is taxation, and the other thing is killing people, not other people, and killing their own people. They're the two things that government excels in, so it's a pretty good title for today's session. Taxation is a complex thing. I find it easier to explain to children all about taxation. I say to children, if you had some ice cream and a stranger came up to you and wanted to taste your ice cream and they asked politely, what would you do? And they say, I'd let them taste my ice cream. Then I say, but if a stranger came up to you and immediately took half of your ice cream, what would you do? And they think, I'd hide my ice cream so they could never do that again. And I say, you understand taxation perfectly. There's many threats today to our civilization. Taxation is one of them, where you're deprived of the outcome of your endeavours. The other threat, I think, is the USA, and that's a pretty tall thing to make. But the USA have hit us with global financial crisis. They've hit us with printing money. They've hit us with all sorts of things, and now they're hitting us with this thing called FATCA, which I think will probably be discussed in more detail, where they're imposing their rules and regulations on the rest of the world. Now, I came across, with our company, I came across FATCA about 2 months back, and I wondered why our two senior people were spending about 2 weeks filling in forms. We were doing a reasonably simple transaction with Europe. And they said, we're filling in all the FATCA, American regulatory forms. I said, what's that got to do with us? I said, it's compulsory. No one in the world can deal with anyone in the world without complying to all the US regulations. Well, isn't that slowing things down? It's turning it around to the benefit of the USA because the money is starting to flow back into the USA, and you get areas in the USA like South Dakota who become virtually a tax haven compared with the rest of the world. So the huge amount of money is going to flow back to the US. There's one guy here that in the Financial Times states that it will be hundreds of billions of dollars by the end of this year that will flow back into the US. So we know why they're doing all this. It's a pity. It's going to slow us down, and we've got to work hard. There are things we can do. We know it's worthwhile working for because there was a model that the USA created once where there was maximum prosperity when they deregulated and we had free enterprise and the world was better for it. But now it's slowing down, so we've got to find a way around this. The things we can do is absolutely look at everything we do. We've got to look at that in business anyway today. If we just do things like the way our parents did or the forebears or the previous people did it, we'll fail. It's as simple as that. We've just got to find a simple way. We go through and strip out all the things that we don't need to do and get rid of them. One of my mentors told me, if we want change, there's 4 ways, exactly 4 ways to bring about change. One is education, one is civil disobedience, the other is physical violence or war, and we don't want that. The other thing is political change. I've chosen really the educational and the civil disobedience, and I'll just mention there's a couple of models of civil disobedience. One is Sir John Cowperthwaite, who was sent by England to run the colony of Hong Kong some years ago. And he was the finance secretary there, and he suddenly decided he refused to send any statistics back to England. So England didn't know what was going on in Hong Kong, and they said, you're in charge of Hong Kong, you're responsible to us, you must send us statistics, all those numbers. He said, no way. The minute you get hold of all those statistics, you will start interfering with our economy. So the economy of Hong Kong boomed, and they still refused to send back, right through to June 1997, they refused to send statistics back to the United Kingdom. It was Hong Kong's secret, minimum bureaucracy. I find there's lots of other things to do. Our company's been going 120 years, which is a long time in Australia. It's 6 years older than the flag or the Australian Constitution. And I said the other day that our company would not have survived if we had have filled in all of the government forms that were given to us or paid all the taxes that we were supposed to pay. It's as simple as that. You must have civil disobedience. Question things. I was running a mining company some years ago, and I saw people filling in forms on what we were doing, how we were spending, what sort of drilling we were doing, and I calculated the cost of filling that government form. It was $15,000 US dollars, so much. $15,000. I said, we're not here to fill government forms, and we're here to find gold mines and make a dividend for the shareholders. And they said, oh, we have to do this, we'll be fined. And I said, read the bottom line. I got them to read the bottom line, and the fine was $100. So I said, put them in the bin. Every time those government statistics arrive, we'll put them in the bin. And they did it. So we saved $15,000 every time there was a form to be filled in. You must question these things. Just don't go along with it. Now, it's a long story here, but I think I've got an engineering background, and I like measuring things. I like measuring the success of different individuals, of different companies, and in the case of my trip around this time, of various countries, where you can pick up ideas, you can transport one idea from another country. It's fantastic. And I think we there's a lot of indexes that are published now, property rights indexes, economic freedom indexes, but I think one of my old heroes, Friedrich Hayek, the Austrian economist, he used to have an index of his own where he said that a good civilization is one where people will flee to, and a bad civilization is one where people will flee from. So it's a way of measuring, and if we could work hard on liberalising and making it easier for us to deal with each other and be understanding like that, we'll have more people coming to your country to trade, and we'll have more people coming to our country to trade. It's a huge responsibility. And the worst enemy of it all probably is that we forget. We forget the results of bad policies. We wonder how bad people get to the top and bad policies remain, but there's a school of thought in economics called the public choice theory that explains the concentrated benefits go to the people who work harder to ensure that legislation gets passed or the bad laws remain. The costs are spread over all the people like us, so we never really march in the streets. We just put up with it. So there's a huge responsibility, and our civilization, our civil society, the whole future of it rests on the shoulders of people like us. So good luck and be relentless in your pursuit. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ron. I gave you many more minutes than you had asked, than we had agreed on. So, of course, it's it's always a deal that you can make. I'm actually just waiting for a text message. I know that the federal minister is already here. And the question is, which I will receive right now, if we have him speak in 1 minute, or if we may continue with our next speaker here on the panel, because I know that the federal minister has a very tight schedule. Okay. So, Federico, could you please take the floor and explain a little bit what is going on in Argentina and why we should not become or must not become Argentinian?
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Federico Fernandez. I'm with the Austrian Economic Center. And I'm very happy for being here. This is my third time, but the first time I had some time to see of your beautiful city. I was having dinner with some friends last night, so I'm very happy, and unfortunately we have to depart today. So very quickly, where is it?
Over there.
This will be challenging. Perhaps it's not on. No, perfect. I'll be talking about a little bit of Argentina and what's going on. Since Argentina is not the best known country in the world, I want to show you that it's not only what I'm going to say, which is not very optimistic, but there are many things very beautiful about Argentina, very, very nice places that you can visit, very good wine from Argentina, very good football players, from yesterday, from today. Unfortunately, we have problems defeating Germany in World Cups, but we are trying to solve that. We're very good at playing polo, and this is probably our best thing. And there's another thing about Argentina. The 21st century should have been the Argentinian century. Everything Argentina exports, and in this I think it's very similar to Ukraine. In fact, I think Argentina and Ukraine are very similar in many ways. Particularly, that they are a country full of very nice people, very bright people, but unfortunately they haven't been able to work as a society properly. And this also unites Argentina and Ukraine, both exporters of commodities. This is what happened with the price of corn. Ukraine is a huge exporter of corn as well. This is since 2001. Price skyrocketed. Wheat, Ukraine also is a huge exporter, bigger than Argentina, of wheat. Price did very, very well. You have from 2011 till 2014, the price is 3 times what was in 2001. I mean, that is perfect. And Argentina is one of the biggest producers and exporters of soybeans. And this is what happened since 2001. The prices sometimes were 4 times, 3 times the prices that were in 2001. Which begs the question, I mean, you have a country which is very related to the agricultural sector. Everything we sell skyrocketed, so why we weren't a success story? What happened? And I would say it has to do with what Yaron said at the beginning. In many ways, because in Argentina, wealth and production are not considered to be a good that you produce, but it's something that society produces, and society has to decide how it's going to be distributed. And by society, of course, we mean the government. And not the government, but its earthly representatives, the politicians. And, they are very, very earthly. So what happened? All these prices, commodity prices booming. There was, of course, more money coming to the country, thank God. But also this happened. Government spending skyrocketing. This is only national levels government spending. You have to add to this provincial government and municipal government, so probably spending is more than 50% now. What else happened? Taxes. Death. In the case of Argentina, it's not death and taxes, but death by taxes. We pay taxes almost as we were living in Sweden, but we receive services that are not Swedish, believe me. And I'll tell you shortly about some of our own innovations regarding taxes, which were very, very, very bad. First one, we tax our own exportations. One of the very few countries that does that. If you produce soybeans, you have to pay 35 cents on the dollar you export to the government. And then come all the other taxes. So your fiscal burden is huge. And this has to do with the idea that your wealth is not yours. I mean, behind charging our own exporters was this idea, they are receiving so much money, commodity prices are so high, it's not theirs. Society has to decide. Of course, in the 90s and the beginning of the 21st century, Argentina had a boom of productivity thanks to technology applied to the agricultural sector, and that was done by the individual producers. But that didn't count at all. The government sensed that money was coming, and so these things appear. Second thing that we did, in an environment with a lot of inflation, tax brackets were never upgraded. Therefore, if you own or earn 17,000 euros, you are considered rich by the Argentinian authorities, and you have to pay taxes accordingly. Fiscal pressure is brutal. According to the World Economic Forum, and you can Google this, the total tax rate of Argentina last year was 137%. Of course, that is not effective because it would be impossible to pay that, but it's a complete mess. And speaking of messes, a complete mess, what they created was a system of taxes. And I think I was talking to some friends last night, and I think that is similar also to Ukraine, between Ukraine and Argentina. A system of taxes which, you can have 2 PhDs, from the best universities, and you can't understand it. It's impossible to be understood. Not even accountants know exactly how much you have to pay, when, to which exact agency. And, and of course, taxes are extremely high, like I told you. So everybody is somehow or another avoiding or dodging his or her taxes. And that created, and this is my last point regarding the bad Argentinian example, that created a very good thing for the government. Because they, instead of creating their own KGB, they started using the tax agency as their own KGB. So, if you, for instance, published a critical article on a newspaper criticizing the government, those guys will visit you. And they can make your life very, very difficult, believe me, very, very difficult. For instance, they can basically make you a civil dead person, because if they cancel your tax number, you can't do anything. You can't do anything. Literally, you can't do anything. So, what's next? In Argentina, we are that guy who is very, very happy there. He won the elections last year. He's trying to dismantle all this system, this crazy system of taxes. The system of taxes that we had, to me, I like to describe it as a two-headed monster. One of the heads, of course, was focused on trying to steal as much money as possible from the citizens, and they were very effective in doing that. But in the second head of this monster was even more sinister, because it was it was a way to discipline the population. It was what taxes became was a weapon of the government against its own population. In a way, it was a lower case of a low case of state terrorism. And what's next here? I mean, Ukraine has given indeed, and you should be very proud of yourself, has given the world a lesson on courage and on dignity. You have to put pressure on that guy to follow the advice of institutions like the. Thank you. Thank you. You have to put pressure on that guy to follow the advice of institutions like the Venedukice Free Market Center, and perhaps very, very soon you will be giving the world a lesson on successful reforms. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Federico. Thank you very much, distinguished speakers so far. We do a short break right now because we have His Excellency the Federal Minister here with us who will give his speech. Mr. Daniluk, please come to the floor, and while we will move down and give floor to you, in a short while while we move here, we will discuss not only Panama Papers and why we need to create many tax havens, because where is tax hell, there is tax haven, and we want the Ukraine to be a tax haven. Please do that. Thank you.
So is it the break or it's time for me to present?
You go ahead.
Good. Given that we have a colleague from Argentina, I'll tell you my personal story. Actually, I studied in business school with Greek. He was a good friend of mine. Eventually, he became the godfather of my son. And he decided to marry an Argentinian. And that was in 2008, I believe. So he invited me over to Argentina as a best man. I came there, and on a wedding, I made a joke. Listen, Greek meets Argentinian. What a nice family. Two troubled countries. You found each other. I never knew that there will be a third one. Sorry, it's just where we're all together, right? But we need to dig out of this hole together as well. Окей, зараз я перейду вже на державну мову.
I'm going to switch to English. I'm sorry for being late, and it's not because I was having lunch and thinking about free economy, but we were sitting together with the Prime Minister and discussing the approaches to reforming our customs. And tomorrow, the session of the Cabinet of Ministers shall see very interesting initiatives that, in principle, will launch a systemic reform of the customs, which will become more transparent for the business. It will be more acceptable, and it will be more pleasant, and for the state as well. And we're going to receive serious resources for the budget of our country. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers, and I'm sort of an organizer myself because I've been involved as a co-organizer of Bendukidze Free Market Center. But anyways, thank you very much, guys, for organizing and hosting it and for attending it. And I think that we share the same vision and the same approaches, being the construction of a free market economy. The construction of a free market economy in Ukraine, it's like getting to heaven. Everyone wants to go there, but no one is willing to do it right away. Anyway, we should have started it a long time ago. Historically, we found certain reasons not to start with that. This is a key process influencing every Ukrainian, but free economy means freedom of speech, freedom of choice, freedom of personality. And we have shown the world that Personal freedom is okay here, but we now need to learn to construct free business environment in this country. And I was always supporting free market economy, and therefore we, together with my colleagues and friends, have created the Bendukiza Free Market Center. Now, when I'm in the position of the Minister of Finance, I clearly state that my vision is unchanged, and this has been discussed at all the meetings, because when people get into high office, sometimes their priorities shift. But every morning that I'm getting up, I'm saying Alexander Daniluk, Bendukiza Free Market Center, and then the Minister of Finance. And this helps because this means this entails values and priorities, and the role, this forms my role in the country. Decreasing of public pressure, of state pressure in business is one of my priorities, and I'm constantly meeting the interpreters from Ukraine and from abroad. And I have an experience as an investor, and I know that they're really tired from inspections by the tax police with machine guns. They're tired and fed up with red tape, and we want to leave this behind. And when the bureaucrats with their papers scare people more than the tax police, this is unacceptable. And regarding the regulation, Ukraine needs to decrease state's presence in the economy and create favorable environment for business development. And I'm sure that everyone here agrees to it. And I have a clear and concise plan how to do that. We need to change the approach of the state to fiscal policy and to change the approach of the tax authorities. So the tax policy and tax authorities should be stimulating and promoting development, not restraining it, because growth of the business will entail growth of budget revenues, but only in the case when business and the tax authorities have an agreement. When there is no abuse on behalf of the tax authorities, and the entrepreneurs are willing to pay the taxes. Many of our countries have proved that, I mean the former CIS countries, and for efficient work we need to reform the customs and take the example of our national police. This is radical, but it works after all. So don't be surprised if in a while working in the state fiscal service will be as good as working as a cop. What can we do specifically in order to decrease state pressure in business? First of all, we need to transform the state fiscal service into a friendly institution instead of a fiscal pressure body. They should not scare the business. We should eliminate tax police, and I have said many times about that. Step by step, we shall do that. We were pushed to make fast decisions, but they will be both fast and resolute. But I would like to, do it in practice and not to like say somebody is guilty that I failed to do that. This will be done within a month or within several months, but step by step. It was easier to create tax police, Even today, it was easier to understand that. We need to create mobile groups, I was told, and tax police should be present. Why, I asked. Because according to this and that law that says that tax police should be there. But I said they have created this institution and they have included it into the legislation. So we need to eliminate these provisions because this will be a prerequisite for the tax police to show up with their machine guns and scare the people. So we need to be aware what shall replace the tax police, and this function should be enforced, but they should shift from people with machine guns into the direction of an analytical center of a task force, because machine guns cannot fill your budget, and money is lost due to the fact that a lot of creative guys from the business, and this is true for the world globally, devise certain schemes how to evade taxation. And in fact, they do it legally. They're looking for legal instruments. And what needs to be done in response by the Ministry of Finance and the State Fiscal Service? Discover such schemes. If they're illegal, they need to be interrupted, but we need to have an analytical resource, because you can't fight an intellectual with a machine gun. And if it's according to the law and if it harms the budget, we need to change the law and close those gaps. And of course, a very important component is the HR policy in the State Fiscal Service. We need to decrease the quantity and to renew the workers and improve the quality. And in the 21st century, we need to implement new IT systems that would enable us to minimize the impact of human factor on the process and decrease the window for corruption. A very important step that I have already mentioned is reforming of the customs authorities. I repeat, tomorrow we shall have the first 3 resolutions in order to pursue the customs reform, and there is a specific intervention from the Prime Minister, which gives an impetus to the entire system, and the Ministry of Finance is fully deploying its intellectual resource to maximally reform the customs authorities. And tomorrow we shall have the law on authorized economic operators and the single window of them. We shall have this law entered into the parliament, registered into the parliament, and there is also a resolution on optimization of customs declaration processing.
And of course the budget funds. That's my favorite issue. Sometimes I feel like a boring teacher in the cabinet of ministers, because it seems to me that I'm saying totally obvious things like, guys, we need to save up some money, you know? And not just our money. We have lots of resources involved through donor assistance. And everyone believes, well, donor assistance, that's not our money. But actually it is. A part of those are not to be returned, but a part we receive them as loans. And then we'll have to return that money. So that's why sometimes they're saying, okay, let's take 3 to 4 advisors. We're going to order this and that. And then everyone has this impression that we have these boiling reforms everywhere. There are lots of consultants running around, meetings, processes. But for some reason, there's nothing in the end. Why? Well, actually, it's just a process. It's much easier to say what we want, prioritize it. And by the way, if we can find our own resource for that, let's use that, because it's ours. It's going to be an efficient use of our funds. So everyone understands here, but unfortunately not in Ukraine, that the budget is actually made up of taxpayers' money, and it belongs to the taxpayers. I would like to tell you an interesting story here. 2 years ago, we started a reform of controlling institutions, and we did that under the leadership of Mr. Groisman when he was Vice Prime Minister. We had a concept, it was supported. That was about the reduction of controlling institutions by 60%. It was launched, it was put on paper, but after the elections, Groisman went to the parliament and everything stopped. And no matter how much we pushed this process, it just didn't want to move. And now I found out, when now I came back to the cabinet of ministers, like, it's interesting. Actually, they do exist. Or they exist for real, or they exist on paper. And by the way, here and there you have to pay real money for those institutions. And here I have this question. Of course, there is always an answer. So what? Can't we liquidate them? There are these processes, and we're explaining to one another. It's really complicated. The Ministry of Justice works on some documents, how we could eradicate them as quickly as possible. Now, let's look how an educated taxpayer sees that. Okay, so we have an LX field, like phytosanitary control. And there, the state is to perform a controlling function. 1, 2, or 3. I agree. Actually, well, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 10. So I would agree with 3 ones. So, how much should it cost for me? So actually, that's like X. But if you look at it now, all these functions, actually, it's not 3, but 10 functions are performed by 10 times more people. Some of them officially, some are institutions which were liquidated 5 or 6 years ago, they still exist. And they still come, and there is a question: what do we pay for? Especially as these control institutions actually they deteriorate the business at the taxpayers' funds and even 10 times more. Well, my approach is really simple. I just want to wait until this moment when these funds are allocated for these institutions. I'm gonna show them the finger. Okay, I'll say no because I believe that it is my obligation. It is my obligation to do that. If I, as the Minister of Finance, am responsible for state funds, why do I have to pay 10 times more for those who actually make it worse for the business? It's better so that I give them just how much it costs, and we'll just do it so that they would perform the functions the way they're supposed to. We need a political will, and it is now there in the Cabinet of Ministers. Actually, we stopped this work with him together, and when nothing happened in 2 years, there is this thing. Okay, we'll come and we'll do that. So follow this thing with the control institutions. They already don't feel too comfortable. But as for the budget, I want to say one thing. The key thing here would be to introduce this midterm budget planning. It is extremely important. It is a very simple principle. I believe that the less money there is, the better it is to be planned. It's very simple. If a person is well-to-do, this person can think about going to the restaurant or know which restaurant to choose and everything. And if the person doesn't have the money, well, actually doesn't ever discuss it. They are counting every cent. We as a country now, we cannot afford going to restaurants. We have to plan how we are going to ensure our social obligations. We have to think about years ahead how we're going to do it and look at the resources which we have for that. If you don't have the resources, we have 2 ways out. Either evaluate our expenses better, or let us do everything so that the economy developed and we obtained this additional resource, and do it so that our citizens actually obtain good salaries and retirement benefits. And I'm for the second approach, And for all this to be implemented, I was already saying that I want our Minister of Finance not to be that conservative. I hope that the Ministry of Finance is going to help the reforms. Because every shift costs something, at least in the beginning. It would be either the cost of political support or real investment, sometimes even small investment. But, for example, the medical reform. But even in 6 months or a year, we see the effect and we believe in that. So I'm only for supporting that reform. And I see the Ministry of Finance as the driver of reforms, which through the budget process are going to change the way our economy works and the way our state field works. And, well, my favorite issue is privatization. There are 2 approaches. The first approach would be to improve the governance of state enterprises. The second would be the privatization of those. And I think the business is going to deal, even without us, how we do that. Now, both approaches are being implemented. Today, I'm going to participate in a nomination committee where we choose a director of one of the state enterprises. I know that they were going to have qualified candidates, like we found a good candidate for a railway company just previously. But this should be only about a very limited number of enterprises. As for the others, they are to be privatized. I do not see any role of the state in recruiting of the whole world, looking for the people who are going to manage our state enterprises. I believe that private sector knows best because they have sectoral experience and they know better how to manage it and how to involve these resources, not from the budget, but actually from the capital markets. So the quicker and these enterprises find themselves in the private sector, the better it would be. Well, here I probably could put a dash, but when we're talking about investment climate, we're talking about the rule of law. So no matter what we do, this would increase our efficiency, but it's never going to be 100% until we change the judicial system. The law enforcement, but ultimately the main thing is the judicial system. Unfortunately, it is stipulated in the Constitution, and I can even tell you more. The Constitution is like this. So that's like the most terrible Constitution. They are holding on to each other, so that is the key reform. If you know it has already been started, we have to complete it, and then we're going to have paradise on earth. Thank you. Alexandra, thanks for your frank talk and for sharing your priorities with us. Do we have more time for a short Q&A session? Okay. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. And if you are against it, about just 5 minutes, because I really have to run. Minister, is there a tax reform in your priorities? Of course. My vision of a tax reform is the following. I believe that we haven't finished this tax reform last year. It is kind of half done, and it has to be continued. But I have a principle stand. It must be responsible, so that we do not create threats for the budget. That's a very responsible approach. How is the approach of last year different? There were lots of disputes. I really want this time to build a dialogue and to actually evaluate if we're going to change something, what kind of influence is going to be on the budget. If the budget influence is negative, then we either look for the compensations or we're waiting. That would be a responsible policy. Because behind every lowering of the tax rates, of course, after some time, there's going to be a dip in the fees. Even a year ago, when I was looking at it, I really like liberal tax reform. That's my approach. But I understand that we're going to have 2 years of fall down of this drop. How do we finance this drop? If we don't have any answer to this question, we and I, as the Minister of Finance, cannot initiate that. So again, that would be responsible politics. It's yes to the tax reform if there are compensators. One more question in the end of the room. Minister, what are your personal KPIs on the minister's post at the end of this year? When are you going to be the most satisfied? I know it's much simpler to put KPIs for others. But as for you to be satisfied the most. Actually, I would really have liked to joke, but there are cameras here. I'm not. Is going to be really held responsible for that. My personal KPI, we approve this 3-year budget this year, and We are going to try 50% of the state fiscal system reform. It was planned for 3 years. I want to have 50% done, and everyone will feel it. As for the others, that's just small things. That's the main thing. Okay, thank you. The next question, please. Good afternoon. Don't you believe that retirement benefits are to be cancelled and to have an adequate reform so that people could themselves create their own retirement benefits? Thank you for your provocative question. Yeah, we're preparing for that. The answer is no. Because now the welfare is really low. And you know that our retirees actually live on their retirement benefits. There is an idea, it's not mine. It was just discussed. There are some radical models when there should be no retirement benefits. There should be just social benefits, social assistance. It seems to me that it was easier for the Georgians to do that because they had like really small retirement benefits. They were so small that you could actually cancel it and then move to social welfare. Because it seems to me that now we are in the situation we have a social state, no matter what you may say, but still it is a social state. And I do not see how we can do it. I think that the solution should be about fair retirement benefits reform, fair pension system, where people... Yes, sorry, how does it look? Okay, look, we're not going to move towards it immediately. It's like for many years to work on, but still, it is very simple. Those who work and pay taxes, they would receive retirement benefits. There should be no benefits. You earn something, you invested it, and then you receive it. Why can't you invest it on your own account immediately? What is the logic about it? Again, there are different models. Okay, but you're saying let's cancel. My answer is no, because you'll be the first to leave this country. No? Well, then you're going to be the only one who stays. Again, there are different models. It's just, I've been thinking about it, how the Georgians were thinking about it. Okay, the retirement benefits are small, and they have children, they have to take care of their parents. And that's actually a radical approach. I believe that we're a developed country. We are all people. And, for example, my parents don't want to depend on me. Well, they don't. That's an important question for them. I don't want to put them in this situation because they worked for all their life. They have the right for their pension. We have to get rid of the injustice in the system. That's the main thing. The system must be balanced and fair. And then we're going to move on.
Thank you very much for this open discussion, and thank you for finding time to come here to this free market roadshow to discuss our ideas and problems. Thank you.
I think we should come back to our panel. Our guests, please be seated.
Thank you very much. Yes. Anton, I would now invite Volodymyr to finally present his talk, but I think the minister has given us a lot of food for thought and also provocative ideas that we can discuss during the Q&A session. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Barbara. Well, it's difficult to speak between the minister and the coffee break, but I'll try to be short, in order not to steal the time for the coffee break. A few observations. Capital is flowing out of the country. and you know the capital rate outflow. The National Bank publishing it not so regularly, but it does it with some regularity. You know the decrease of GDP per capita and overall. You know other bad things, industrial production, industrial output decrease, and many other appalling figures. The question mark here, to what extent the taxation problem or the problem with tax system have contributed to this difficult situation? Is it only taxation system or there are other factors? Well, it would be unfair to blame the taxation system for everything, although we have truly Byzantine on the one hand, draconic on the other hand, not very efficient, not very well thought taxation system. But to be absolutely frank, it's not only it. Let's not forget about currency control regulations, who do not let you doing anything effectively. As Madam Ambassador has mentioned, the investors are not allowed to pay dividends from Ukraine, and this is for many years already, for almost 2 years. And you can imagine how much the exchange rate has, for how much the hryvnia, local currency, has dropped since the time when dividends have been accrued and until now. So many investors are just looking, I'm sure they're looking at the pile of dividends they're unable to export, and they must be in tears. But the taxation system is often mentioned, and rightfully so, as one of the key deterrent factors, because it's visible to nearly everyone. Well, to those who pay taxes himself, mostly direct taxes, because taxation system, the beauty of it is that effectively all of us, all of you, are participating in funding the public needs. Even if you believe that you are effectively hiding from taxes, you are not. You are paying VAT, you are paying excise taxes, you are, at the end of the day, you are paying inflation tax, which is not called a tax, and because it doesn't require any law to be introduced. But the trick is that the situation Ukraine is in, partly caused by taxation system, problems with it, partly caused by deficiencies in other areas of regulations, is such that we have to scrap the old social contract effectively. Well, de facto, it has been scrapped, and the capital outflow, the rate of shadow economy, which is reported by the Ministry of Economy and has reached 60%, at least those two factors are signaling that the old social contract has expired, and something new has to be brought. What the minister was talking about reform on the one hand, and attempts to decrease the budget deficit effectively. He suggests to live by means. The country has to live by its means, and the tax reform proposals, which he rejected. I mean, he rejected the too liberal proposals in terms of tax reform. He suggested that as long as there is no compensators for tax losses, for tax revenue loss, I mean, we should wait with the introduction of a new tax rate or lower tax rate until we either cut the expense or find a replacement or find a new source to fund the public needs. But I suspect that the discussion about reforming the public finances, and in particular taxation system in Ukraine, will be developing or will be concentrating around at least 3 issues. Issue number 1, how to make sure that the taxation system doesn't impede the development of individual wealth, or increase in individual wealth, and hence increase of GDP per capita. Second, how to make sure that taxation system doesn't provide for unlawful benefits for selected groups, circles, whatever, including bureaucrats, by the way, or in the first hand, bureaucrats. And third issue, above all, is that how much public spending we can afford and we should have. Because the more public spending we have, the more taxes we have to charge to, to the society, to the businesses, to individuals. All those three issues, I understand, they are on the agenda of the Ministry of Finance, but the program of the government doesn't signal, at least the program published so far, doesn't signal clearly what will be the potential outcome, what will be the decisions, the solutions in terms of resolving those problems, or at least what would be the reaction of the government towards those three key issues. In any event, I guess that the popularity of economic freedom and liberal ideas will be skyrocketing. On the one hand, amongst those active segments of the society, and I'm sure it will be perceived with I'm trying not to use a strong word. It will be perceived not so positively by people depending on the budget, on financing from the budget, from the state revenue. Nevertheless, one may say the truth is in between. Well, what is in between is a compromise, and I think the compromise is inevitable. The tricky thing is that when reaching the compromise, we have to keep open the way to reaching another one at high level of efficiency and justice, if you wish. But at the end of the day, the taxation issues or taxation reform, which the minister has mentioned, will be introduced, and I believe it will be characterized by more transparency, by greater level of friendliness towards taxpayers, and I guess that the rate of redistribution of public wealth through the taxes would go down. And by the way, the the previous government has achieved some moderate but successes in reducing the public expenditure rate or redistribution of GDP through the budget. All in all, I mean, the events like this, they are vital in terms of gathering together people with their views on the tax system, on the future of the taxation system, and conveying the messages to the stakeholders. Thank you very much to the organizers, and hope this event is not the last one. Thank you.
For sure.
Thank you very much, Volodymyr. I mean, there is something like the Laffer curve that we have all heard about, and I think this could be a potential example how things work. And I think we may continue with a short debate here, and Q&A, or are we? Yes.
No, we have about 20 minutes.
Wonderful.
Before break, so we can use it maybe 5 minutes for debate, and I want to involve our audience.
Actually, we should involve them right away because our speakers are here to be challenged. I just quickly want to bring in the various views. Yaron, focusing on individualism. Without individualism, we are dead. Quoting Hayek, the individual thinks and acts. Societies and governments don't. So it's the individual who makes the decisions. Volodymyr, with his wonderful tour de force, what is happening right now and what could be done. Federico, with the example of Argentina, why they failed and what can be done as well to solve it. And his country is in a transition as well. If this current new prime minister doesn't get it right, I think he will be doomed. And then, of course, a wonderful example of Australia and positive ideas of an entrepreneur, how things can be changed if you are brave enough. And I think your country has proven. So I think I hand it over to you, Anton, to run the debate here. And I only would like to say warm regards from Prince Michael. And the bad thing about Liechtenstein is right now they will be under BEPS and FATCA on the 1st of January 2017. So things are not looking too good for the rest of Europe. So we need member states of the European Union, but also friends and partners of Europe that focus on tax competition and really focus on lowering, reducing taxes and coming in with smart ideas.
Thanks. So, anyone want to ask question? Just one comment. If you will ask question in Ukrainian, please do it slowly in order to translate it well. So.
Український журнал «Економіст».
Ukrainian magazine Economist. All the panelists have mentioned fighting offshores or tax havens. Can you please formulate again your recipe for Ukraine's success in fighting tax havens?
I don't know why you got the impression that we're for fighting tax havens. I love tax havens. I think tax havens are fabulous. If I can find a way to keep more of my money and have less of it stolen by the government, I intend to. Unfortunately, I'm not rich enough to appear in the Panama Papers, but if I was rich, I probably would appear there, and I would take it as a point of pride that I was making every effort possible to shield my money that I worked hard for from the taxpayer. So I love tax havens, and I think what Barbara was suggesting is that maybe Ukraine should become a tax haven. That is, you should try to be, because Panama is running away from being a tax haven. They're succumbing to international pressure. You should tell the United States to go, I want to be polite here. To shove it right somewhere, and that you welcome Americans who want to shield the taxes, and you will tax them a lot less than anywhere else in the world, and capital will flow into Ukraine. We've got to stop again thinking of taxes. The minister did this the same approach, right? We have to decide how much of your wealth we are going to redistribute. No, you get to decide how much your wealth you get to keep. And the government should encourage that, not discourage that.
Okay. Additional comment?
Yeah, I would like to echo what Yaron has said, but from a little bit different perspective. I believe it's...
Я хочу продовжити те, що сказав Ярон з іншої перспективи. Я думаю, що неправильно говорити про боротьбу з офшорами.
As well. And by the way, not only and sometimes not mostly for tax purposes, but for other purposes. Saving the capital, protecting the capital. Well, I'm not speaking about corruptioners who tend to hide their wealth over there. I mean, people all over the world probably do that. But speaking about Ukraine, I think the more domestic problems or in-house problems we have, the greater appeal of the offshores will be. I think there is no other way to make offshores unpopular rather than just by making Ukraine comfortable and popular place for doing business and living in.
Very interesting question. We have another 3 comments.
One point. I think we are all entitled to tax havens and not the other way around. So this is the right way to think about it.
I think the two most portable things on this earth are people and capital. And for centuries, governments have tried to stop and prevent the movement of people and capital. They've always failed. So that encourages me. I'm an optimist, and things like that encourage me. People will find a way of moving themselves or their capital around the world, and you can't stop that. It's fruitless the way they do it, but it just imposes a cost. We'll have to be more clever. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Federico?
Just very briefly. tax havens are a myth. What they really are is international financial centers. What are realities and are tough realities are tax hells, like Argentina, like France, like Germany, like Spain, and like many others.
Thank you. Please, your question.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much for these very interesting views. You just represented it. I just want to point out, as to my knowledge, none of the arguments you presented were supported by any of Friedrich von Hayek's writings, and neither was the Austrian School of Economics has never argued against the necessity to raise taxes and to the necessity of a state. So this is very interesting, but it has nothing to do with August Friedrich of Hayek.
Well, let me challenge that. And I'm not a Hayek expert, but the Austrian School of Economics, while it believes in a state, while Mises certainly believed in the existence of a state, I don't know. I'm certainly not an anarchist. I believe in the state, but the state, to do what von Mises wanted it to do, would require tax rates below 10%. Flat, simple. And that's what we're arguing for. And the fact is that tax havens exist today not to avoid paying 10%, but to avoid paying 60% or 70% or 80%. And that von Mises would cheer. Von Mises would argue with the existing tax regimes as anti-individualism, anti-freedom, bogus economics, bad for the economy, and that if countries want to avoid their entrepreneurs sending money to Panama, it's simple. Lower your taxes below the taxes in Panama. Tax competition is, should drive that. But of course, governments don't have to compete. They can just erect capital barriers, which is what Ukraine has done, what other countries have done. So certainly Mises would be 100% behind what's being said here in the panel.
Well, in Law, Legislation and Liberty, and both in the Constitution of Liberty, Hayek argued for limited government, for limited state powers. And this also includes the power to tax. So I think the logic consequence is clearly that the Austrians, Hayek himself and many others, were in favor of lower tax rates. You may, of course, come in and say Menger started with the marginal tax rate. No. That's a bad thing. But we have not quoted Menger today so far.
Can I respond to that?
Although if that's all if we accepted everything else Menger stood for except for that, the world would be a very different place. Menger was a genius.
Very shortly.
But not comment, please question.
We have a coffee break where we can...
She just mentioned the Constitution of Liberty, and I want to respond to that because in that document, Friedrich August Hayek argued against a certain tax regime, which is the progressive tax regime, but he was in favor of a fair tax and as well of a fair pension system, as the Minister of Finance pointed out. So that's exactly what Hayek is. Hayek never said something like civil disobedience like Manners proposed. So I'm very sorry. You said you're not a Hayek expert.
I'm not. Hayek, it turns out, was very fallible, and he made lots of mistakes, and he said lots of wrong things.
Okay.
Let me recommend this. Ayn Rand took The Road to Serfdom, and she has marginal comments on it, and it's very illustrative of all the compromises Hayek makes for the case for liberty in The Road for Serfdom. Don't take Hayek as the Bible. He's a genius economist, and as a political theorist, he was very mixed.
But again, he was arguing, or in his speech when he was awarded the Nobel Prize, he was talking about the pretense of knowledge and the arrogance of those who believe that they know everything. So he was clearly arguing for, again, being humble, and fair taxation means also flat taxation, and means low taxation. And this is a logic consequence.
Yeah, 30 seconds. Just my suggestion, let's not focusing on Hayek himself, but on our conceptual issues.
That's the thing. I think one key issue here is that Hayek is not the Austrian School of Economics. Indeed, he's one of the main authors, but you know, Hayek, like all great men, made also great mistakes. But in fact, the current developments of the Austrian School of Economics, I would even call them anarchists, and at least they are very reluctant of grant the government any, you know, any use at all. And you can find those ideas in Peter Bethke, Ben Powell, Ed Stringham, and many others. So,
Thank you. Additional questions, please.
My question would be, how do you
Microphone.
My name is Andrei Magas. I'd like to ask a question. What about large infrastructure projects? How can private individuals make them happen if it involves a lot of small individuals, like transnational railroad, for example? Second question, dispute resolution between these individuals. And the third question is also, what about pensions?
So I can't remember the second one. Let me do the first one. The most successful transnational railroad in the United States, the Northern Pacific, I think it was called, that went from Chicago all the way to the coast of Oregon and Washington, was 100% funded and built by private entrepreneurs. You do not need government for large-scale infrastructure projects. Indeed, the government-run railroad in the United States, which was the famous one that runs from California to the East Coast, was corrupt, disastrous, never made money, and was built badly, so it was constant need of repair. The private one was brilliant and made money from day one. There's no, look, at the end of the day, every infrastructure project is built by private people. It's just through the government, right? An inefficient institution taxes us all and takes our money and builds a big infrastructure project. If the big infrastructure project makes sense, you should be able to raise capital voluntarily for entrepreneurs and make money. And infrastructure projects that make sense, a lot of the ones the government built, like windmills and solar panels, don't make sense. And therefore government has to fund them. But if they make sense, there will be entrepreneurs to build them. Pension plans, quickly. Look, while certain promises are being made to existing people that if you just stopped it tomorrow, they might not have it, you have to maintain. There's absolutely no reason why pension systems cannot be phased out so that within a generation they don't exist. Individuals are safe for themselves. This is an issue of personal responsibility. It's an issue of morality. It's an issue of taking care of yourself. There's no need for the government to intervene. Social Security in the United States is actually the worst saving plan you could imagine. You could put the money in a bank at low interest rates and get more money out of it than you would out of Social Security. So let people invest their own money like they do in Chile. In Chile, the entire pension plan was privatized. And 99% of people, and people were given an option, stay in the state system or privatize it. 99% of Chileans have chosen to be in the private system. Government has no business in pensions. Government has no business in the economy. Government is good at protecting us. Government's about guns. Government is forced. The nature of government is forced. That's George Washington in the second inaugural address. Guns have no business in the marketplace. Get them out, which means get government out of the marketplace.
Thank you. Any other opinions? No? Okay. Next question, please. Everybody tired? Oh, either want a coffee. So let's welcome. Yeah, just a minute.
Thank you. Miriam Kusmil of Naumann Foundation. I do have a question regarding tax havens. What about money laundering? What is your stance on that? I'm not so much focusing on using tax havens for taxes, but for other purposes.
Well, you can money launder everywhere if you want to. And you can even money launder if cash is being, or the 500 euro bill is being abolished as it's being discussed now in Europe. So if we look at Panama especially, most of the people, and there is a recent study that 90% of the money that is there has been, earned honestly and has been delivered there in a clear, transparent way. There will always be people who cheat, and we cannot avoid that. But you cannot avoid that if you control it and if you regulate it. And I don't think it makes sense. The more market, the more competition, the more freedom we allow, the better it is. Because also then people become wealthier, and by that they have more for themselves. They don't need to cheat. They don't need to keep it. And I think they will be more transparent. And by the way, I think privacy is also something very important, and that we should stick to that. And we have been used for years and years and decades. Actually, after it started out with World War I or after World War I, when we had government taking over, doing more and more, and doing more tasks for us stupid individuals because we are unable to make our own decisions. And now we think about infrastructure projects, that the government should do that. That's ridiculous. We have not relied on governments for hundreds of years, and we're able to survive very well. And I think we should go back to this point and free ourselves from big governments and reduce their influence in our personal lives.
Let me, a quick comment. The role of government is to catch crooks. And if the money is made through thievery or through real crookery, then it's the job of the government to do that. But the government cannot do that and should not do that by treating all of us as crooks. The problem with the laws as they are today is the assumption is we're all crooks and it's our job to prove that we're not. We need to find mechanisms where the government can find crooks and go after crooks without violating all of our right to privacy. It's just like in the NSA with regard to terrorism. The government, because it's trying to catch terrorists, does not have a right to listen to everybody. They should need a warrant to listen in to somebody specific if there is reasonable cause. The same with our bank accounts. Our bank account should be 100% private. If the government has reason to think that we're money laundering, then they should have to get a warrant to go and investigate that particular account. So the assumption should always be of innocence until proven guilty, and the proof of guilt the burden of guilt has to be on the government. So yes, it's going to be harder, but you're protecting fundamental rights that way. Today, we're all being treated as crooks. That's what all these new laws of the Federal Reserve and the treatment of banks. I mean, a lot of banks in the world won't open bank accounts for Americans anymore, because they don't want to have to be treated as money laundering banks by the Federal Reserve of America. So the assumption needs to be flipped. Start with we're all innocent and go after the bad guys. And then going after the bad guys, in my opinion, will be much more efficient, because you'll only focus on truly, suspicious activities rather than on, just like the NSA. By listening to everybody, you don't get the bad guys. If you just focus on really suspicious activities, you're much more likely to get them.
Thank you. I would suggest to continue discussions during coffee break, and I want to thank all participants of the first panel. Let's give them applause. And we will come back here in 30 minutes, and we will proceed with the presentation of reforms program, which we called Agenda for Ukraine. So, уважаемые зрители трансляции, возвращайтесь через 30 минут. Продолжим.
So, the audience, please come back in 30 minutes. We'll continue with the reform.
Доброго дня ще раз.
Good afternoon again. Please sit closer to us. We're not at school. No one's going to be punished for bad behavior. I want to invite Timofey Milovanov and Paulo Kuchta. Yes, Paulo, it's written here that you are deputy head of the strategic group. Who is the head? So you're the deputy of Balcerovich and Miklos. I don't know who is there in the front row, but actually his driver is Brezhnev. Yeah, okay. So now we'll start discussing how the ideas of economic freedom, of free markets, how you do it so that they work in our country. And I really would like to start from a presentation, how we see it in the center of the free economy, in Bidukidze center, I mean. So I'm going to speak Ukrainian, but the presentation is in English. And Timofey and Pavlo actually agreed to participate and share their own thoughts. I'm very happy to speak here at the Free Market Roadshow because Ukraine is a very important frontier for everyone who values the ideas of freedom. And I would like to share our vision on how do we transform the country from a loser into an example, a success story, which would inspire our supporters over the whole world, while helping spread and implementing the idea of free and open society. The topic of my speech is the initiatives of Bindukidze Free Market Center. Our idea is about creating a radical reform program, which will change the dynamics of intellectual and political discussion in the country. Ukraine has been for a long time a country with constantly growing potential, a country which constantly lags behind its neighbors and it gets its share decreased in the global economy. So now Ukraine has to fulfill its potential finally. My presentation consists of two parts. First, I'm going to tell about the basic facts, where we are, and what we achieved in the 2 years after Maidan. By the way, tomorrow there will be 2 years after the presidential elections. The second part would be about what we offer to do, so that in 3 or 4 years after today, we're not ashamed of ourselves and before our families. If this presentation took place 2 years ago, the slides would have been almost the same as they are now. Ukraine stays the most repressed economically, the most corrupt, and the poorest country in Europe. The basis for this was put into for decades. If we look at the following slide, we'll see 5 lines. These are the dynamics of economic growth of Ukraine and its neighboring countries, Turkey, Bulgaria, Poland, and Russia. We see that this total lagging behind the neighbors has grown significantly with time. As for relative lagging behind, it has also been growing. If in the early 90s the GDP per capita was almost half lower than in Russia, in 2015 it's 2/3. At the same time, we see that Bulgaria and Turkey are not lagging behind as much, and Poland even managed to come before Russia with its oil and gas reserves. I'm not going to analyze in detail why it happened. The main reason is obvious, that is the lack of many reforms which were implemented by most post-communist countries. I'll only add that this lagging behind was more or less acceptable for the population, because in comparison with the 2 last decades of USSR existence and then USSR existence, the growth rate per capita in Ukraine has grown significantly. Unfortunately, it was also thanks to great immigration from the country. Still, Euromaidan exploded against the background of very slow development. It couldn't but irritate the population, even if it didn't realize the economic reasons for the discontent. After Maidan, we had 2 governments of Yatsenyuk. Ivan Miklish, who is actually absent due to a valid reason, he's in Astana now. He likes saying that during the last 2 years, Ukraine did more reforms than during the previous 2 decades. And I agree with him. Increasing gas tariffs to the market level, that would be significant reduction of budget costs and budget deficit, total general social climate, which helped lots of big and small reforms. Unfortunately, there is no justice in politics and history. Ukraine has accelerated, but to get to the trajectory of sustainable development, that was not enough. The distance to the normal state turned out to be really big, because it had been accumulating for years. The next slide is the evaluation of the reform progress. This was done by IMORE project. 2 of its participants and protagonists are now here at this stage. This is Timofey and Pavlo. We often talk to each other how we reform a country, but it is rather telling that according to this index in Ukraine, the reform speed was insufficient. It's totally understandable that it has some political consequences, but if we look closer, we'll see that only 3 times during the last 33 or 34 periods of evaluation, the growth rate was higher than 2. That is more or less normal. So, the political consequences. If we calculate the dynamics of populist and right-centrist parties, dynamics which are now represented in the Verkhovna Rada, we'll see that in 18 months after the parliamentary election, the support of right-centrist forces, that is the reform forces, has decreased significantly. The trust has actually fallen almost to very, very great. Then the ranking of Poroshenko has significantly plummeted. On the self-help ranking stays more or less the same. As of the start of this year, the populist, Tymoshenko, and opposition bloc are almost twice more popular than the so-called pro-European political forces. So these indices are saying that political crisis is not done yet with the new government. So in autumn, there's going to be the growth of political tension. Lots of forces, political forces, are interested in early elections, at least to the parliament. Now, we are somewhere on the very bottom of the half-reform cycle. Piecemeal reforms. Well, the social moves become more radical. This means that there'll be the radicalization of not just populist position, but also the reformers who are aiming for real changes and not just coming back to the weak and corrupt economic system of the past. This will enable the reformers to really battle the following elections. The key to success would be in the coalition of moderate and radical reformers. Here we are moving to the second part of my speech. Who are radical reformers? Why do they have any alternative to the existing state of affairs? I believe that Ukrainian political expert intellectual community has finally matured to formulate an uncompromised vision for the future and sketch out the steps that will lead us there. First of all, the vision. As a poet was saying, I might have heard it, or maybe I have dreamed it, that there is the land of dreams. It seems to me that this may exist, this country may exist, and if we are telling about this country, I would actually do it the following way. Ukraine, as the land of dreams, is the country with huge prospects. Ukrainians use all opportunities for self-realization. Those who cannot take care of themselves receive all-around support from the society and the state. The amount of rights belonging to citizens does not depend on their property or social state, and everyone is equal before the law. All Ukrainians, independently of their origin, have equal opportunities for development. This is a free country with strong political system, free from oligarchs' influence, with one of the freest economies in Europe. It is a fair country with the restored judicial system, strong police, which deserves the public trust, and with zero tolerance towards corruption. This is the most dynamic economy in Europe and one of the most dynamic countries in the world. The country has an intensive development of the infrastructure. The state spends no less than 3% of the GDP to update the roads, as well as air and water communications. It has implemented a new healthcare system. Polyclinics, clinics, and doctors are fighting for the client. The new higher education system, where money follows the student, has zero tolerance to corruption, zero tolerance in the universities. Powerful financial system which will allow the citizens to efficiently save up, including a worthy life in the retirement age. And the entrepreneurs can involve investments. To get somewhere where this vision calls us for, we have to be aware of the principles, goals, and tools of the new reform agenda. One of the most important principles is to be realistic. That is, require impossible. Here, this is the main difference from the moderate reformers who have to act taking into account the existing political limits. It's quite possible that this is one of the reasons that after the victory of Maidan, Ukraine did not obtain a really radical agenda. And when there is no such agenda, then there is no point hoping that the leaders will be able to have the political will for that. The political will is preceded by the intellectual will implemented in the programs, law drafts, and others. So this new agenda aims for two things. We need to depolitize the process of economic decision-making, both on macro and micro levels. Businesses have to compete on the markets and not in the session halls or in the presidential administration. Households have to count only on themselves and not just wait that politicians are going to decide and solve their problems for themselves. Another goal is to open up the way for self-development, to create the order of free access, of open access, according to Douglas North. The tools for that. First of all, is quick and deep liberalization. Everything that is not prohibited is going to become allowed. We have to disassemble bureaucratic companies which only provide permits, taking out the resources from the productive activities. Second, Ukraine needs to use the success of reform countries. You have to look for more reasons to import institutions. This is about construction, pharmaceutical standards. To do that, we need to certify the medicines. They have already passed this procedure in the civilized countries. It is also about borrowing jurisdictions which enjoy good reputation. The new agenda is to involve tens of directions, from the monetary regime to the utilities reform. That is why this slide is so bright. There are lots of fonts here, hues and sizes.
In order to include the existing drafts into the program, they require more or less processing. Then we have 5 slides. 4 of them are about specific reforms, and the 5th one is about one of the instruments, in particular electronic auctions. I will not dwell on each and every one, but the structure of every part should be more or less identical. I'm going to show you an example of judiciary reform. First of all, we need to scale the problem. Taking into account Ukraine being behind the bordering countries, creating the so-called existential threat to the country. In every segment, we need to show Ukraine's place in the world, how far away we are from the best practices. Then we describe the political and economic background. The block of solutions contains specific proposals how we can promptly shift the situation in the right direction. This new radical program should be devised within the next 3 months, and the Bendukidze Center would like to organize expert discussion on all the three, and in any case, the creation of a new reform coalition will give an impetus to speeding up the reforms and Ukraine's development. Thank you for your attention, and the floor is given to the panelists. My name is Pavlo Kuchta. His name is Pavlo Kuchta. He is my friend and reformer, and he will be responsible for the moderate wing of the reform activists. Well, I will play, like the reform, the moderate reform wing. Probably, my position will entail the description why it's not happening within these 2 years and why the reform process was way behind than what Volodymyr has just described. Because we are going in the direction that he said. The vision is more or less the same. It can be different in parts. Both the Yatsenyuk and the Groisman governments and the administration of the president really have the same vision or the same picture, but why are we not going there in such a pace? Because let's be realistic. Unfortunately, in this country, not everyone is supportive of this initiative, and the political will is not actually behind the activists willing to do that. So you can see that the parliament is not voting for reform documents, and there are pro-Russian forces interested in Ukraine's non-existence or Ukraine's existence in a very different format. Therefore, unfortunately, we don't have 100% of reformers there, not being very much radical, but making this country happen. But in order to achieve it, we need to create the parties and the political forces that would be supported by the society. We're not talking about parties now. Well, I'm just stretching it a little bit, Well, I've read the wrong paper. We need to, take over the government and devise a program. Well, talking about a draft of the new program, of the new action plan for the coming year, what has been already achieved from the radical agenda, what needs to be included? I would say like this: the action plan from the government was devised in a decentralized manner. It was created at the grassroots and actually consolidated in order for the people implementing it to be supportive of the actions and not sabotaging them. I think that in a way it was successful, and in principle it's in line with the reforms that were implemented earlier and that are leading to the vision that was stated, and I think it's a reformist one. How far in the radical direction it goes? Well, not that radical. There are certain parts that are rather moderate. Certain parts are quite in line of the programs, and certain parts were going beyond the political realia. They were considering the possibility to get it through the parliament, and therefore this is an action plan, and this is not a vision, and they have to undertake its implementation. So on their point of view, they are trying to include what is realistic. Prior to giving the floor to Timothy, I wanted to ask you, what 5 reforms are included into this program, and what can be said by the Prime Minister Groisman in the year to come? What will have been achieved by then? Well, he would say, I have established a single market price for the gas, and I've started a powerful and rightful process of privatization, having privatized the 6 major state enterprises and having eliminated corruption, and the corruption money flows poisoning our political system. And possibly, if he pursues in his office, this can be multiplied. I hope that he will be able to say that he has reformed the budget system of the country, and that he has launched the land market. And I think this would be enough at this stage. Thank you. Should I talk into this thing? I have a bit abstract view of the things, because actually I have moved from Ukraine for 6 months, and every half year I'm coming here, I'm hearing the same program. It's not fair what I've said, but certain things have been done, really. And a macroeconomic stabilization has taken place, and it's on the agenda because a year ago the GDP and the currency rate and inflation were sort of freely floating for 3 months, and it was really not known how to stop that. And Yatsenyuk's government actually managed to stop it. Probably you might not like the results of their work, but you should be fair to them that they have stopped this decline, and it's enough. But in order for the people to be satisfied, we need certain growth in the level of life that was before the crisis. So to achieve this level, and it's quite complicated because it's really hard to go out of the decline. Secondly, we don't have external growth drivers like from the world, because the global economy now lacks the inspiration to invest not just in Ukraine but in general. Everyone is sort of aware what is going to happen with the global restructuring in China. And in Syria there are problems. So there is no unified support on behalf of the economic forces globally. And inside the country we also have certain difficulties, because the country is built on the idea of loyalty to each other, and we can see it in the political processes where people sort of pull their friends up, and when we're doing business not with the most suitable ones, but not with the people who have the most appropriate skills, but with the people that can be trusted. Because we'd like the structure that would ensure discipline and organize individuals together and get them to agree to work together. Because this morning, for example, I received an email that I need to respect a very important meeting at 2 o'clock today. This is not acceptable. And I see that many people would do that because this is the government, so they would probably neglect something else. But this is not responsible to, warn you in the morning that you have to go somewhere in the afternoon. So until this culture changes, actually, we should discontinue working with the people that we actually like, because this kind of promises is not very helping the business. Because we cannot trust new people, we cannot restructure. We have problems with the Donbass and Crimea areas. We have the problem of restructuring export with to Russia, and we need to enter the global European market. And if we do not trust the people, we cannot restructure. We can also add the tax reform and our tax administration and similar structures are sort of creating red tape trap for the businesses. So people are fined and people are sued, or even bullied before the court. For example, their current accounts are blocked or their servers are confiscated. We're not talking about certain reforms, radical things, but we need to ensure certain reputability, fairness. We cannot destroy this trust because of a certain one-time, benefit, like running to the minister, and you are ruining your agenda. This is unacceptable, and until it changes, it will be very hard to implement global reforms, because these are the things that are in line with the program, and I'm very supportive of it. But I would like to say that in order to implement this program, we need a platform that we can construct it upon. If we cannot park here because somebody has blocked the way, and it would have been easier to go 10 centimeters ahead, can we do the global things? It will be a landscape process, and hinted on that. They treated me in a client-oriented business way. It was the same major that used to sit there before, but he was behaving differently. Today I was also discussing a license for the economy school with the Ministry of Education, and they actually the attitude was very different. So if we want to deal with Romania or Czech Republic or some other European countries, we need to learn to respect our promises and to think about the others, not just about ourselves. And this derives from the time horizon. If you're thinking about tomorrow, you need to think 5 or 3 years ahead. And how can you think about 3 years ahead when you don't have economic stability? So economic macroeconomics or stabilization is very important. We need to think at least 6 months ahead, because when the currency is dropping every day, you can't possibly plan anything. So certain conditions for growth have been created by the previous government, and we need to make use of them. Secondly, I would like to say that we have global pairing. I don't know how to translate it. Such a phenomenon. And we have crisis, we have Maidans, we have a decline in the currency rate, then we have stabilization, and if the global markets start to grow, they pull us out, and then it goes over and over again. I'm not saying about the president. These are the people probably that have by chance been promoted to this place. For me as an economist, it's secondary, but I'm really questioning myself about these economic cycles in Ukraine. There is another country, Moldova, with a very low GDP per capita figure, and probably you might be tired of this question. But the question is there something wrong with the way we manage our state? Because the president and the prime minister are always in conflict and are trying to squeeze the other out, and usually it's the president who remains. So, and after that they start to be more inclined to become a dictator, and this pattern is repeating from 1992. Sometimes it's worse, sometimes it's not that bad, but it's leading to a political crisis, and we have had 17 governments in 24 years. So it's normal that we are in reforms for 2 years if we have a crisis and we're changing the government. But we cannot change the government every year within 25 years. It's an evidence of a systematic problem. It's not an evidence of the bad president. So notwithstanding the Russia problem, we have some systematic challenge that we need to look into and to look into it in more detail. And it lies in the fact that our constitution actually creates a conflict between the president and the prime minister, and how we resolve the situation, not creating a dictatorship or an oligarch state. This should be resolved by the society, but not by analysts. And we need to make a new community agreement, and we need to talk about this stuff. And I'm fully supportive of this, and I need to have the background to implement it. And the situation that you have now, is it not a mess, actually? It can be worse. Before we go over to the next one, I would like to support what has been said by Timothy. On the one hand, he was saying very holistic things until the culture changes and our actually skills and customs change. We cannot count on quick growth. But on the other hand, yesterday he found a lot of changes and another culture. And I wanted to say that the objective of this program, the goal of this program that we are proposing for discussion and for transforming into an intellectually powerful instrument, lies in the fact that we need to find leaders of certain sectoral reforms, because actually the police reform was made possible because there was one person and then several other persons joined, who undertook the responsibility because they knew how it worked in another country and they knew what needs to be done for that. Should we have such leaders with a very well-grounded position and very sure that they're going to succeed, then we shall have very interesting results, not just in the small scale, but also in other domains. And I really urge all the people present, we would like to inform you that starting from the next week, we shall gather roundtables in our Bendukidze center, free market center, involving not just the supporters of the free market idea, but also the opponents of that, because we need to know where the soft spots in our ideas are, and this should be not the same that has been discussed for years, as Timothy says. We need to be honest to ourselves, and we need to agree that half steps are really not working. This is my comment to what Timothy has said, and I hope that Timothy and Pavlo shall be actively participating in finding the gaps in our arguments and strengthening our argumentation and making this program not just intellectually fulfilled but also attractive, because the reason of reforms is to improve the lifestyle not just of one person but of millions. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us. And now we can go over to the comments. I have a comment to what has just been said. Regarding local leaders, the crises that have taken place, they can be regulated, you know. And I'm very proud of the Ukrainian people.
Because Ukrainian people don't give any chance for some people to actually usurp the power. When people get down to them, they just throw them over. That's something really Ukrainian, which does inspire the world. But at the same time, it is not revolutions or crises built on leaders. We don't have people who, for example, sat in prison for 15 years and they would fight for liberal reforms, for freedom, and then they got out and the people followed them. Well, we had people's movement, Chernovol and everything. I know, I didn't mean that. I meant sectoral leaders. Yes, I just wanted to bring my thought until the end. I understand that it is rather orthogonal, but there is just this opinion that if some changes actually happen here, they're going to be built by many people who are trying to do something in certain directions. The same reforms, I mean, I think that indirectly, Pavlo and you both confirmed it, that if there is some leader who takes up ownership or owns the reform, we have these little islands like Prozoro or some others. There are some people or groups of people trying to push it through, and this is all really decentralized. Actually, the revolutions are decentralized here, and the changes are also decentralized, and it looks like the reforms are also decentralized. We're complaining that there is no vision from the leaders of the country, that there are no country leaders whom the people would follow, that their support is falling. But still, there are some reforms happening because there are people, and there are lots of those. They are in their places, and they are leaders of their own reforms or changes. And probably this might be our power, and we have to accumulate it. We have to imitate these best practices. We see that there are leaders who take up their own reforms and they call this reform through, so we need more of these leaders. Just take and do it. That would be the slogan, I think. Thank you. Okay, thank you. We have some time for a Q&A session. Someone has questions? Andriy Mory from Concours company. I have 3 short questions to each speaker. I would like to congratulate you on here. Actually, do you believe that Kyiv School of Economics can become a platform for intellectual support of economic reforms? Because last week we had this conference on national bank transformation. I'll answer this question, yes. So, did he actually get out of the expert circle? Not, because how much the expert community is actually involved. And as for the author, of the books, when will be this book, The Fifth Republic? Thank you. Who will be the first? Yes, the School of Economics produces people who can then help do the analytics and improve the understanding, support the reforms, and we're doing it rather quickly. We have an annual program, we have an 18-month program, so we constantly prepare such people. De facto, the school actually participates in it, and for a long time, because it was founded 20 years ago. That is why today there are people in the government and in all think tanks and analytical centers who actually start in this school. It is very important. We're going to keep doing that, and we're going to do it better. And we're going to transform it so that it is fun to be there. That's a simple answer to your question. So have you broke away from the expert circle? Actually, they told me that I didn't. Okay, thanks for the question. And for almost 2 years, I've been trying so that nobody treated me as a former editor-in-chief of the Forbes magazine, and now you're investing me into a new title, but I'm more proud than these books. I'm more proud of my contribution into creation of for purification movement, into some concrete action, which in my opinion had a very important influence on the events, on accelerating the resolution of this political crisis, which was in the country starting from autumn last year. And in my opinion now, the most productive investment would be the investment into the change of intellectual and political agenda in the country. And this is something I'm going to do. The Fourth Republic is there, and I think the Fifth Republic will never come.
My name is Alfred Braus. I'm Austrian, entrepreneur, investor, consultant. Congratulations concerning the radical reformist plan. Just some remarks. First remark, comparing GDP per capita is a very dangerous thing, taking into account that, say, 50% of the Ukrainian economy is shadow economy. So the figures are certainly not right. Maybe there are no better figures, but I just want to comment, to make comparisons like this is difficult. Second comment, to say to reduce bureaucracy, or maybe to get rid of half of people in communal authorities, etc., this would mean hundreds, thousands, maybe millions of unemployed people. How to feed them? They need some money, unemployment benefits, etc. So in some part, you may only shift the problem with this. The problem stays the same, it just pops up somewhere else. Last point, generally speaking, to reduce or to extinguish graft or red tape or corruption or palm greasing, however you may call it, this requires doubling, trebling, quadrupling of salaries, because otherwise this small graft and small corruption has to stay because it is inbuilt into the Ukrainian system. Otherwise people could not feed the families. So the question to have a radical, or say at least a big step reform, would be how to raise billions of dollars to increase the salary levels, and only then you can say, okay, if you are corrupt, you're fired immediately. If he has treble salary and if he can feed his family, and if he is not dependent on getting some additional money in order to survive with his family. Thank you very much.
But you are talking about civil servants only, or any in general?
Teachers everywhere.
But you are talking about
police
yeah.
Ministries, judges.
But not about private sector.
Not so much about private sector.
Okay.
May I ask you, are you a socialist? No?
I'm humanist.
Thank you. But in my opinion, to be human is to empower people, not to bind them to the feeding hand of the state or some political patron. And the problem with the Ukrainian economy is not that people are not able to work. The problem is that the system impedes productive ways of using existent human skills. I tell you it from the point of view of entrepreneur. I came into Ukraine almost 6 years ago, and I find here very talented people, and we made very, very successful media business in Forbes Ukraine. And I'm absolutely sure that with cutting red tape, with freeing people from the grabbing hand of the state, the problem of raising salaries, it won't exist simply.
Can I comment too? So
I agree with points. These are actually important fundamental points. They apply not only to Ukraine, they apply broader. So sort of I would call them first principles in a sense of reform, that you need to worry about not just shifting the problem. There are also fundamental issues which are specific to Ukraine, and they interact with the points you have raised. One of them is that it seems that the public is somehow not used to building horizontal connections between different groups. For instance, most of the companies, universities thinking about education, they're thinking about procuring government funding rather than trying to innovate and produce skills needed in the market so that they can raise directly commercial revenues. So the fact that the state is there, it somehow captures not only the rents, it also captures the development of innovation. I don't know why is that. Maybe people need pressure, incentives matter. I agree that we need to protect people and there are all the dangers along the way, but also fear that if we do not take drastic measures, they will be taken by necessity because we are anyway taking them by not being able to pay salaries and pensions or devaluing the currency rapidly after yet another crisis. So I think there are no easy solutions. You're talking about billions of dollars raised. That's correct. We don't have those billions of dollars. But also it's unclear how if you continue to keep such an amount of labor force out of productive activities, what would be the solution? So there are no easy answers, and the points are well taken.
About shadow economy, Paul.
Well, yeah, unfortunately, even if you had a really rich estimate of shadow economy to Ukraine, you would still end up with a very low number compared to the neighbors. So the point is right, point taken, but everything that Vladimir said would still stand.
I would add another argument. I'm not born libertarian. I still read a lot of mainstream economic literature, and we all know that shadow economy is not very competitive. It's yes, it helps to feed families, but it lacks sources of growth. It has no access to finance. It has no rules that help companies to grow bigger, to become competitive on the world market stage, and so on. So in this sense, this comparison still makes sense. It shows that restraints on Ukrainian competitiveness in the world and in Europe.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Andrei. I would like to ask Pavlo, I guess, what is it, where is it planned to put the income from privatization? And in this regard, my second question would be, maybe it makes sense to use the revenues to fund new governmental people. We do not need, Ukraine does not necessarily need a lot of borrowings or special fund to pay salaries. We can use the revenues from privatization to pay salaries to the best people who are selected on competition. Teachers do not belong there. The state has to consider strategical purposes. And teaching is not what our state can now pay for. So we must start from public governance. And paying is possible, $1,000 per month easy with revenues.
Okay. So
what do you think?
What about sources from privatization?
Well, I'd say your question actually breaks down into one, what do we do with privatization money? Two, who exactly do we fund out of civil servants, right? And I actually agree with your approach. My own approach is that we should fund key personnel in policymaking units. Start with them. That would not cost that much. At maximum, that would cost about 1.5 billion hryvnias. It's been calculated.
Million.
Billion. ministries, all the ministries' personnel would cost, raising their salaries to competitive market level would cost about 1.5 billion hryvnias, which is affordable even without privatization. So yeah, I think we should start. Why don't I do it? I don't know. I can't. Unfortunately, I can't. I would. Trust me. If I were in position to do it, I would do it. As for the revenues from privatization, currently they are budgeted in the general budget fund. I think it's 17 billion calculated into this year's budget. So we're supposed to fill the coffers with what we sell this year. They can certainly be earmarked for something. They cannot be earmarked. I don't think it really matters. We can throw them into the single kettle, you know, and then distribute money from there. We can earmark them for, I don't know, pensions, whatever. Special salaries. Though I don't think funding special salaries would make sense. With
Can I add an additional question to you? What do you think? What is the main idea of privatization in Ukraine in the nearest future? To get money or to get rid of state-owned enterprises?
I'd say it's definitely to get rid of corruption that's related to the state enterprises. I'm not sure we will get that much money from. In fact, the estimates I've seen were like a year ago. I think that all of them cost what $3 billion, right, something like that. And 5 years before they cost $7 billion. So they're actually getting cheaper each year. We're losing them. They're not earning us money. We should get rid of them. They're earning us problems now.
Thanks,
Timothy. So have a couple of comments. One about privatization. The risk with having big companies owned by the state is, first, it distracts the very scarce resource of competence that exists within the state into managing these enterprises, assuming they're being managed. And it creates incentives for politicians to fight over appointments, so that they can divert the assets of these enterprises in order to finance their political campaigns and deliver rents in exchange for political support. And that's a real problem in Ukraine. So moving them out of the state ownership will actually shift that battle outside of the state, and one can hope that the state will become somewhat cleaner. Now, the battle over the control of these enterprises by vested interest and dark and light forces will not be over there, but at least the cleaner corporate will have a chance to participate in that battle, because some companies actually, and we want those companies to exist, they are restricted from bribing guys to get control or to divert assets and work through this sort of gray area of corruption. So we want bigger participation of people who want to get their hands on these assets in order to develop these assets in something valuable. So that probably is one of the main reasons of privatization specifically for Ukraine. But the risk here is that it will feed further inequality. This privatization was not successful in the post-Soviet Union. And it has generated oligarchic system, and that's a consequence of the assets being redistributed in a very special ways. Okay, so the issue of property rights protection and takeovers and all kinds of things. Now, I agree. So the second remark I would like to make, and I agree with this kind of descriptive approach, that it would be nice to sell enterprises and earmark money for good guys in the government, taking up, setting apart teachers, doctors, and everything. Let's just focus on that. It sounds good. If it happens, it will be good. We believe in that. But why would it happen? Why these funds will not be diverted? Why the key personnel? Who will be the key personnel? Today, because they're not being paid, there will be some people who are enthusiastic about that and will work. Tomorrow, they will be paid a lot, and good luck trying to get in the ministry, because you will only be able to get in the ministry if the rents are high, if you have within a part of the system. So there's something, in all these reforms and descriptions, something critical is missing. We have 25 years of not being able to implement these reforms well, and suddenly something works. You know, there are the sporadic successes. We do not understand what works and what doesn't. We can just say, oh, Procuratura doesn't work, bad president, bad general prosecutor, bad someone. And this works, good people there in this ministry or something like that. But we really do not have understanding, political economy kind of understanding, why certain reforms go through and some others don't. And until we get this understanding, we will be just guessing. It's just like shooting in the sky with the reforms, because we need to understand why certain reforms work, what's structurally different. And then we have to take that as our advantage and scale up on all other possible reforms. And I think that understanding is lacking at this point. So we can write down all possible excellent scenarios, but they will be sabotaged. And some of them will not, and will lack the understanding why.
Are you serious?
Yes, I'm serious about
because
this.
I see that, so to say, big bang style reforms or Georgian-wise reforms, like reform of police work, and reforms that are based on trade-offs with the old guard, they don't work. Just so simple.
I'm not quite sure what to answer, because, you know, it's like, it's not a game where you say from the top, oh, that's what we need to do, and now a chess player, you know, you're inside the system. You say something here, you know, good luck doing a reform. You know, you have to form coalition. It's not easy. There is a real constraint of implementing it. And we also don't understand very well why it worked in Georgia and why it doesn't work here. You're going to tell me because there were these people, but some of these people are here. So, you know, you need to tell me a more compelling story about what is truly is different, fundamental. Now, I can tell you a little bit of a compelling story. What is different between Georgia and Ukraine? So in Georgia, it's my understanding, superfluous, actually from talking to Georgians about when they get frustrated in Odessa and elsewhere and say what doesn't work, is that the Soviet Union has not invested in creating nomenclatura in Georgia, but they have invested into creating nomenclatura in Ukraine. That Ukraine has been important enough that internal Soviet Union governance system has built up a specific class of people who are a network. And they are also evolving through these revolutions in terms of resistance. So they go in the shadow and then they rebuild. Slowly, softly, but surely. And now we need to understand where they get distracted, why they don't care about Prozora and why they care so much about Procuratura. And perhaps we can trade off on the time horizons. If they care, if they immediately threatened and distracted by Procuratura, we can put some fundamental reforms which will kick in 5 years from now, and they just don't have the capacity to fight all of them at the same time. We just need to understand what is the most important for them to protect and not attack that. And attack what is not important for them, and it will catch up with them later. But we don't have that kind of understanding.
Okay, next.
Тут я как неравнодушный либерал.
I'm a liberal, I have to tell you. Well, it's kind of several short questions. Okay, Pavlo, 3 quick wins of Groisman's government in the nearest 100 days. For Timothy, from the point of a person from outside, which field is the epic fail in the reforms presently? And to Vladimir, again to your background, appealing to your background as the editor-in-chief, what is your opinion? Do you believe that it's necessary to improve the communications of the Cabinet of Ministers? And if so, what would you say should be done immediately? You know, it's hard to answer here because they depend on the parliament. Well, if there's going to be a quick win. If they don't vote, it doesn't happen. But where is parliament and where it's the government? Well, what would you want? The IMF? Well, those 14 lawyers that I have to vote now, and not even all this, it's just going to be, it's the sign that the system is going to be still workable the nearest time.
Fail is lack of leadership in the country, which is in crisis. No one leads the country. We don't understand where we are going. No one talks to us, and that's the biggest fail. And the fact that we have not been able to consolidate the progressive forces, 2.5 years after that with a clear agenda. And thank you, you're trying to do exactly what has to be done. And much more needs to be done. That's a failure. And it's not failure of leadership that we elected. It's the failure of people who became proactive and have not been able to find a way to consolidate themselves into some specific agenda. To compromise, because everyone is heterogeneous. Everyone has a different agenda. But in order to get something done, you have to compromise. It's better to get something done rather than to argue about all kinds of different approaches. And so we have our reformers in the government, but they are split around all kinds of factions. They're being traded here and there. They're making some compromises. They get fight, but they lost a little bit the compass. And it's not clear what are we fighting for today. We came to Maidan, or many of us, because of the issue of justice, I believe. But we have never been able to refine what justice really means and where the red lines for us are and who our leaders are. And that's the biggest fail, and that's not the government's fail. It's the reformers or the reform-minded people fail, that we have not created a powerful force, political force, first of all, which would be able to discipline the government.
Значит, мой ответ на...
My answer to your question is a bit broad, but I have listened to the Minister of Finance today, and I tried to imagine how a reform-minded minister comes to Prime Minister or the President saying that I brought a reform package to you. And my impression is that on behalf of the President or the Prime Minister, the attitude is very cautious. It's like, why is this guy trying to do something? And the problem with communication is that, and actually Timothy has just said it, is that the country leaders have such a vision that they see reforms as a threat, not as an opportunity, because they want to preserve the political elite being part of it. And I think that we can improve communication, but until the leaders of the country, both those that we have elected or those that we are going to elect, until they are aware that a fast transformation of Ukraine into a country without the post-Soviet legacy, until then it will be limited in its impact. So therefore we need to make the leaders aware that being reform-minded is cool and it's the only thing that can ensure their political longevity. Therefore we need to have certain shifts in their mind. Thank you. I think that we have time for 2 short questions, please. I understand that the mic is needed for the interpreters. I have a short question to Volodymyr. I think that you're making an alternative plan, and if it's true, what is the final objective and your final vision? What are you going to do to this document? Like, you have made it very beautiful, you have presented it, but you don't have a result. Nobody can predict the outcomes of their actions. That's why we are doing what we think is most appropriate at the moment. Pavlo Kuchta has just told that their program is sort of bottom-up approach applied. You have asked whether this is an alternative. Of course it is an alternative to the status quo that exists today, the bureaucratic machine collecting contributions from the ministries that have for years been preparing based on the donor assistance and so on and so forth. And we think that a certain reform benchmark should be made. And having that benchmark, we will be able to achieve 2 targets at the same time. First one, we shall have the opportunity to assess whether the actions of the government are reform actions, whether they bring us to the frontier, and we change the quantity of the participants of this intellectual and economic and political and economic play, where we now have two groups: populists and reform-minded people, like moderate reform-minded people. And we shall help the second group as well, because we shall change the balance in the public discussion in favor of the more radical and profound reform-minded people. Would you like to add something? Well, I would like to hear the comment of Pavlo and to add that on the 19th of May we presented the program. It's a draft program. And as far as I understand, the window of opportunity is open, and we want to hear how think tanks or experts can propose their ideas, in particular our Bendukidze Center, in order for this program to include more radical and more profound and fast reforms. Very simple. This is an operational plan, not the action plan, not the governmental program. This is just a list of measures, and you can include proposals. Send in your email to the address stated at the Cabinet of Ministers website. It's not a fake. They really track it and they send it over to the ministries. There are just several tens of proposals, several dozens of proposals. There was and rechecked, and they have been sent to the subordinate ministries. I have a question to the developers of this plan. Do you have an intention to include such a question as initiating the compliance with the Constitution in respect of one of the core principles of the Constitution, distribution of powers between the legislative branch of power and the executive branch of power, which is the basis, so the confusion of the two is the basis of the present-day corruption. If this principle was respected, there should be no system when political decisions are made in the parliament, then the parliament appoints a government based on certain quotas, then the people are distributed to rein the money flows, in particular to public enterprises, and this is the core prerequisite for the crisis. And also another one is the unwillingness to change anything. Timothy Milovanov is next to me, and he started his return to Ukraine from the question of constitution reform. And I fully agree with Timothy that we really need a constitution reform, and now we, at the level of local self-government bodies, have a mixture of legislative and executive branches of power. Regarding the constitution reform, on my opinion, we need to have a constitutional process in place and eliminate the limitations and drawbacks that disable us in being more efficient and a more strong country. But in order to ensure that this constitutional process is healthy, we need to get back our economic growth. We need for a year or two, ensure economic growth at a good speed, good pace, that will change the climate in the society, and this would be the best variant, in my opinion. And I agree that we can have significant political crisis that would lead to a constitutional crisis, and then we shall start from the constitutional process. Thank you. I would like to say thanks to all the participants and all the team, and I would like to say thank you, dear speakers of the second panel. Please applause. And to crown it all, I would like to say about the core tasks of this event. First thing, we wanted to show, with the help of our speakers and foreign colleagues, that the same question of offshores, not the problem of Ukraine, it's a world problem, and tax evasion in international jurisdictions is global, and it's not to be solved during eliminating offshores. We need to reduce the tax burden in the national environment in order for the business not to be interested to go abroad. The second objective is to present our vision of innovational approaches and reforms for them to be heard, and we will gladly give them to the new Cabinet of Ministers and to the task force under the Cabinet of Ministers. And the third objective is to educate. So we will publish all the materials of this event at our website, bendukidze.org, all the photos and all the presentations and all the speakers' contributions and other analytical materials to be contributed by our guests. So do subscribe and keep track of the events and of the analytical materials that we're going to publish. And see you in the nearest future. Thank you for participating. Bye.